Welcome to the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit, where articles come alive. You're listening to the audio version of our article. For the full text and an interactive experience, check out the link in the description below. Interact with any selection using our AI assistant to enhance your understanding. Let's explore.
Key critical race theory thinkers and authors in discourse analysis. Critical race theory, CRT, has significantly evolved through the contributions of scholars such as Kimberlé Crenshaw, Derek Bell, Eduardo Bonilla Silva, Patricia Hill Collins, Bell Hooks, Charles Mills, and Richard Delgado and Jean Stefanczyk. Each of these scholars brings a unique perspective to how race and intersecting identities are understood within legal, social, and political contexts. This comprehensive overview examines their seminal works and core ideas, particularly focusing on how they have shaped discourse analysis. Kimberlé Crenshaw's concept of intersectionality, Derek Bell's interest convergence theory, Eduardo Bonilla Silva's analysis of colorblind racism, Patricia Hill Collins' emphasis on the politics of empowerment, Bell Hooks' critique of systemic power structures, Charles Mills' idea of the racial contract, and Delgado and Stefanczyk's exploration of legal narratives together enrich our understanding of the complexities of race and its profound impact on society. Through their theories and methodologies, these scholars encourage a deeper scrutiny of how discourse constructs and perpetuates power dynamics, offering valuable insights into the mechanisms of oppression and the pathways toward greater social justice. 1. Kimberlé Crenshaw. Kimberlé Crenshaw is a foundational thinker in critical race theory, CRT, whose contributions have significantly shaped the discourse on intersectionality, a term she coined. Her work has profound implications for discourse analysis, particularly in how race intersects with other categories of identity like gender, class, and sexuality. Crenshaw's scholarship provides critical insights into the complexities of multiple identities and how these intersections influence experiences of oppression and privilege. 1. Introduction to Kimberlé Crenshaw and Intersectionality. Background. Kimberlé Crenshaw is a prominent legal scholar and a leading authority in CRT. She introduced the concept of intersectionality in her seminal 1989 paper, Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, a Black feminist critique of anti-discrimination doctrine, feminist theory and anti-racist politics. Crenshaw's work initially focused on the experiences of Black women, highlighting how analyses of gender and race often exclude the unique experiences at their intersection. Defining intersectionality. Intersectionality refers to the framework for understanding how aspects of a person's social and political identities combine to create different modes of discrimination and privilege. Crenshaw argues that traditional feminist approaches and anti-racist policies fail to address the unique experiences of those who are simultaneously members of more than one marginalized group, such as Black women, who experience both racial and gender discrimination. 2. Implications of Crenshaw's work for discourse analysis. Analyzing layered identities, complex identity dynamics. Crenshaw's intersectionality urges discourse analysts to consider how identities are not singular but are comprised of multiple, overlapping layers. This approach encourages a more nuanced analysis of how discourse constructs and is constructed by these intersecting identities. Revealing hidden intersections. In discourse analysis, applying intersectionality involves looking for where and how different identity categories intersect in the texts and talks, often revealing hidden power dynamics and overlooked narratives. Challenging single-axis analysis. Critique of monolithic categories. Crenshaw's critique of single-axis frameworks that address only one form of identity or oppression at a time pushes discourse analysts to avoid simplistic categorizations. Instead, they are encouraged to explore the synergistic and sometimes contradictory interactions between various identity markers. Inclusive analytical frameworks. Her work calls for the development of inclusive analytical frameworks that recognize the complexity of experiences shaped by intersecting oppressions and privileges. Empowering marginalized voices, elevating diverse narratives. Intersectionality helps in identifying whose voices are marginalized or silenced in dominant discourses. Crenshaw's framework pushes for an analysis that not only critiques these omissions but also seeks to bring these voices to the forefront. Policy and social change. By understanding the complexities of intersectional identities, discourse analysts can better advocate for policies and social changes that address the specific needs of the most marginalized. Kimberlé Crenshaw's work on intersectionality has been transformative, particularly in the fields of feminism, CRT, and discourse analysis. Her insights compel researchers to critically examine the intersections of race, gender, and other identities within discourse, challenging simplistic representations and advocating for a more comprehensive understanding of human experiences. Crenshaw's theoretical contributions continue to influence a broad range of disciplines, encouraging a shift towards more nuanced and equitable approaches in both academic analysis and practical policy making. 2. Derek Bell. Derek Bell, often recognized as one of the founding figures of critical race theory, CRT, made profound contributions to the understanding of race as a central and enduring factor in shaping experiences and interpreting reality in American society. His work challenges both the legal framework and societal norms that perpetuate racial disparities, insisting on viewing race as a pivotal element in the discourse about rights, laws, and justice. Derek Bell's contributions to CRT and discourse analysis. Interest convergence theory. Foundational concept. One of Bell's most influential ideas is the interest convergence theory, which he outlined in his 1980 article, Brown versus Board of Education and the Interest Convergence Dilemma. Bell argued that significant racial reforms occur only when they converge with the interests of white people in the power structure. This theory suggests that the advancements for racial minorities are often permitted by whites not solely due to altruism but because these changes also provide benefits to the dominant group. Implications for discourse analysis. In discourse analysis, this theory prompts a critical examination of how racial issues are framed and discussed in various contexts, including media, politics, and education. It encourages analysts to consider whose interests are being served by particular narratives and to explore how these interests might shape the presentation and reception of racial issues. Permanence of racism. Core argument. Another pivotal aspect of Bell's work is his assertion of the permanence of racism, where he posits that racism is an enduring, integral feature of American society. This perspective challenges the progressive, linear model of history that suggests continual improvements in racial justice. Application in discourse analysis. Understanding racism as a permanent and structural component of society enables discourse analysts to explore the deep-seated nature of racial narratives and to question the efficacy of supposed post-racial or color-blind policies and practices. It also encourages the examination of systemic barriers that maintain racial inequalities. Narrative style and storytelling. Storytelling as method. Bell was known for his use of narrative and allegory as methods of teaching and argument, evident in books like And We Are Not Saved and Faces at the Bottom of the Well. He believed that storytelling was a powerful tool to convey legal and social critiques, making complex issues accessible and relatable. Impact on discourse analysis. Bell's narrative approach has significantly influenced CRT's methodology, emphasizing the importance of counter-narratives in discourse analysis. By bringing personal and collective stories of marginalized communities to the forefront, Bell's approach challenges dominant narratives that often exclude or misrepresent these perspectives. Derek Bell's insights into the role of race in American society and legal systems have been instrumental in shaping CRT and, by extension, discourse analysis within this theoretical framework. His concepts of interest convergence and the permanence of racism compel scholars to scrutinize racial dynamics in discourse critically, examining how race is intertwined with power, policy, and perception in enduring ways. Bell's advocacy for narrative as a form of resistance and enlightenment continues to inspire discourse analysts to utilize storytelling as a powerful tool in unraveling and challenging the racial status quo. Through these methodologies, the nuanced exploration of race in discourse analysis not only illuminates the complexities of racial issues but also fosters a deeper understanding of the pervasive impact of race on reality. 3. Eduardo Bonilla Silva. Eduardo Bonilla Silva is a prominent sociologist whose work significantly contributes to critical race theory, CRT, particularly through his analysis of modern racial inequality and systemic racism. His seminal book, Racism Without Racists, addresses the subtleties of racial dynamics in contemporary society, especially focusing on how systemic racism is perpetuated even in the absence of overtly racist individuals. This concept is crucial for discourse analysis within CRT, as it provides a framework for understanding how language and discourse sustain and normalize systemic racism under the guise of neutrality, colorblindness, and meritocracy. Racism without racists, and discourse analysis. Colorblind racism. Framework. Bonilla Silva's concept of colorblind racism describes a form of racism that ostensibly avoids overt racial language and discriminatory intent. Instead, it relies on subtle, often institutionalized and seemingly non-racial practices that maintain racial inequalities. He identifies 4 frames of colorblind racism: abstract liberalism, naturalization, cultural racism, and minimization of racism. Application in discourse analysis. In discourse analysis, this framework is used to examine how everyday language, policy discussions, educational materials, and media discourse use these frames to rationalize or justify racial inequalities. For example, the frame of abstract liberalism might be identified in discourses that stress equal opportunity without addressing structural disadvantages that prevent such equality. Systemic nature of racism. Conceptualization. Bonilla Silva argues that racism is deeply embedded in the fabric of society. It transcends individual prejudices and biases, manifesting instead through institutional practices and cultural norms that perpetuate racial advantages and disadvantages. Implications for discourse. This perspective encourages analysts to look beyond individual utterances or biased speech to explore how institutional discourses across various sectors, education, law enforcement, housing, etc., perpetuate systemic racism. This involves a critical examination of how policies and practices are talked about and rationalized. The role of discourse in sustaining racism. Normalization of racism. Bonilla Silva's work illuminates how discourse serves to normalize and obscure the realities of racism, making it an accepted part of everyday life. Language that appears neutral or non-racial can have racial implications, reinforcing existing racial hierarchies. Challenging dominant narratives. From a discourse analysis perspective, Bonilla Silva's theories underscore the importance of challenging and deconstructing dominant narratives that fail to acknowledge racial biases. Analyzing discourse for its complicity in sustaining racism involves uncovering the subtle ways in which language contributes to the marginalization of certain groups. Eduardo Bonilla Silva's analysis of racism without racists provides critical insights into how systemic racism is sustained through discourse in ways that often go unrecognized by society at large. His work encourages discourse analysts within CRT to scrutinize not just the content but also the structure and implications of everyday language used in various societal domains. By understanding and revealing the discourse patterns that contribute to systemic racism, researchers and practitioners can better challenge these structures, promoting a more equitable society. 4. Patricia Hill Collins. Patricia Hill Collins is a pivotal figure in the field of sociology and a seminal contributor to both critical race theory, CRT, and Black feminist thought. Her influential work centers on the intersections of race, gender, class, and sexuality, examining how these categories affect social dynamics and power relationships. Collins is renowned for her book, Black Feminist Thought, Knowledge, Consciousness, and the Politics of Empowerment, where she explores the unique perspectives of Black women and the importance of their experiences in understanding power and oppression. Her approach to discourse analysis emphasizes the significance of intersectionality and the politics of knowledge in shaping social realities. Contributions of Patricia Hill Collins to discourse analysis. Intersectionality in discourse. Framework of intersectionality. Collins' work has been instrumental in developing and applying the concept of intersectionality, which considers the multiple dimensions of identity and disadvantage. In terms of discourse analysis, her approach involves examining how various forms of identity, race, gender, class, sexuality, are not only interconnected but also co-construct each other within different discourses. Implications for analysis. This perspective allows for a deeper examination of how societal power structures are embedded within and perpetuated through discourse. By analyzing texts, media, and communication through an intersectional lens, researchers can uncover the nuanced ways in which certain narratives and languages privilege or marginalize different groups. The politics of knowledge. Centrality of epistemology. Collins argues that the way knowledge is produced, who gets to produce it, and which knowledge is considered legitimate are all deeply political processes that reflect existing power dynamics. Her focus on the politics of knowledge challenges mainstream epistemological assumptions and highlights the role of power in shaping what is known and how it is known. Application to discourse analysis. In applying this concept to discourse analysis, Collins' work suggests that analysts should question whose voices are heard and whose are silenced in various discourses. It also involves examining how certain knowledge becomes mainstream and how alternative perspectives, particularly those of marginalized communities, challenge dominant understandings. Empowerment through self-definition. Self-definition and resistance. Collins emphasizes the power of self-definition as a form of resistance against the dominant narratives that often misrepresent or marginalize minority groups. She advocates for the empowerment that comes from marginalized groups articulating their own experiences and truths. Relevance to discourse analysis. This aspect of her work encourages discourse analysts to focus on how marginalized groups use language and narrative to define themselves and resist oppressive structures. It involves exploring both the content and form of these expressions to understand their impact on wider social discourses. Patricia Hill Collins' insights into intersectionality, the politics of knowledge, and empowerment through self-definition provide essential frameworks for conducting discourse analysis within a CRT perspective. Her contributions urge scholars to consider the layered complexities of identity and power in analyzing discourses and to recognize the transformative potential of including marginalized voices in these analyses. By doing so, discourse analysis not only becomes a tool for understanding societal structures but also for challenging them and advocating for substantive social change. 5. Bell Hooks, Gloria Watkins. Bell Hooks, born Gloria Watkins, is a profoundly influential figure in critical race theory, feminist theory, and cultural criticism. Her extensive body of work, which spans topics such as race, capitalism, gender, class, and education, offers vital perspectives that enrich discourse analysis within critical race theory, CRT. Hooks' writings are particularly noted for their incisive critiques of systemic power structures and their intersections, as well as her emphasis on transforming oppressive systems through education and critical consciousness. Contributions of Bell Hooks to discourse analysis. Critique of dominant power structures. Intersecting systems. Bell Hooks' work critically addresses the interlocking systems of oppression that characterize society, namely, racism, sexism, classism, and capitalism. She argues that these systems cannot be examined in isolation because they work together to maintain inequalities. For discourse analysis, this perspective is crucial for understanding how language and media perpetuate these interconnected systems. Implications for analysis. Hooks' approach encourages analysts to examine discourses not just for overt expressions of racism or sexism but to understand how these expressions intersect with other forms of oppression, such as economic exploitation or class discrimination. Education as the practice of freedom. Critical pedagogy. One of Hooks' significant contributions is her view on education as a liberatory practice. She believes that education should be about empowering individuals to challenge and change the status quo. In the context of discourse analysis, this translates to examining educational policies, curricula, and classroom interactions to see how they either reinforce or challenge existing power dynamics. Application to discourse. Analyzing educational discourse through Hooks' framework involves looking at how educational institutions can either perpetuate systemic inequalities or serve as sites of resistance and transformation. Role of media and culture. Cultural critique. Bell Hooks has extensively written about the role of media and popular culture in shaping perceptions of race, gender, and class. She explores how mainstream media can disseminate stereotypical or harmful portrayals but also how it can be a space for progressive change. Analysis of media discourse. In discourse analysis, Hooks' insights lead to a critical examination of film, television, literature, and other forms of media to uncover both the reproduction of stereotypes and the potential for critical, transformative narratives. Engaged pedagogy and personal narratives. Personal as political. Hooks emphasizes the importance of personal experience and narrative in understanding and challenging systemic injustices. She advocates for an engaged pedagogy where personal truths and stories form a crucial part of educational discourse. Narrative analysis in discourse. This approach in discourse analysis would focus on personal narratives, particularly those from marginalized voices, as powerful tools for challenging dominant discourses and reshaping societal narratives. Bell Hook's critical insights into how race, gender, capitalism, and class intermingle provide essential methodologies for CRT and discourse analysis. Her focus on systemic critique, education for liberation, and the transformative power of media and personal narrative significantly contribute to how discourse analysts approach, interpret, and critique social texts and interactions. By applying Hook's theories, scholars and practitioners can deepen their understanding of how discourses function to maintain or disrupt power structures, leading to more informed and effective strategies for social change. 6. Charles Mills. Charles Mills is a distinguished philosopher whose seminal work, The Racial Contract, has significantly impacted critical race theory, CRT, and the broader field of philosophy. His arguments focus on how racism is embedded within the foundations of Western political and philosophical discourse, proposing that these discourses are fundamentally shaped by a racial contract which dictates the terms of social, political, and moral interactions. Mill's insights are crucial for understanding the role of racism in structuring societal norms and for analyzing discourse related to race, power, and policy. Contributions of Charles Mills to discourse analysis. The concept of the racial contract. Philosophical framework. Mill's concept of the racial contract posits that the social contract, a foundational idea in Western political thought proposed by theorists like Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, is actually underpinned by a racial contract. This racial contract is an agreement among whites to privilege their own interests and perpetuate racial inequalities at the expense of non-whites. Implications for discourse. In discourse analysis, this theory suggests examining how political and philosophical discourses have historically excluded or marginalized non-white perspectives. It encourages analysts to scrutinize texts for underlying assumptions about race that dictate social and political rights. Racism and epistemology. Epistemic injustice. Mills extends his critique to the realm of epistemology, suggesting that non-white, non-Western knowledge systems have been systematically devalued, a process he terms epistemic injustice. This framework is essential for understanding how racial biases shape whose knowledge is considered valid and whose is disregarded. Application to discourse analysis. Using Mill's approach, discourse analysts can explore how certain racialized epistemological assumptions are embedded in educational, political, and scientific discourses. This involves analyzing how texts perpetuate certain views of knowledge and reality that reinforce racial hierarchies. Deconstructing political and moral philosophy. Critique of liberalism. Mills critically examines liberalism for its claims of universality and neutrality, arguing that it has historically upheld racial inequality. He challenges mainstream liberal discourses that fail to acknowledge their complicity in racial oppression. Analyzing political discourse. This perspective is particularly useful in analyzing political discourse, revealing how liberal political theories and practices may perpetuate racial exclusions despite their ostensibly inclusive rhetoric. Charles Mills' work on The Racial Contract and his critiques of Western philosophy and political systems provide profound insights for applying critical race theory to discourse analysis. His theories challenge discourse analysts to consider how deeply embedded racial assumptions influence not only political and philosophical discussions but also broader societal and cultural narratives. By integrating Mills' critiques, scholars can uncover the covert ways in which race informs foundational societal constructs, leading to a more nuanced understanding of how discourse perpetuates or challenges systemic racism. His work empowers discourse analysts to critically engage with texts, uncovering hidden racial contracts and advocating for more just and inclusive discursive practices. 7. Richard Delgado and Jean Stefanchik. Richard Delgado and Jean Stefanchik are seminal figures in the development of critical race theory, CRT, and have made significant contributions through their scholarly work, notably with their book, Critical Race Theory, An Introduction. This text serves as an essential resource for understanding the foundations of CRT and its application across various domains, including law, society, and discourse analysis. Their work explores how racism is structurally embedded within American law and how these legal frameworks influence broader social narratives and interactions. Contributions of Delgado and Stefanchik to discourse analysis. Exploration of legal discourse. Law as a mechanism of racial power. Delgado and Stefanchik critically analyze how American law has historically reinforced racial disparities. They explore the role of legislation, legal practices, and judicial decisions in sustaining racial inequalities, which is fundamental for understanding how legal discourse shapes societal norms and perceptions about race. Implications for discourse analysis. This approach encourages the examination of legal texts, judicial opinions, and legislative debates to uncover the racial assumptions and implications embedded within them. By analyzing how legal discourse constructs and perpetuates racial categories and hierarchies, discourse analysts can better understand the dynamics of power and oppression in societal structures. Narrative and counter-narrative in law. The power of storytelling. Delgado and Stefanchik emphasize the importance of narrative in law, arguing that the stories told within legal contexts can either reinforce or challenge existing power structures. They advocate for the use of counter-narratives as a method to bring to light the experiences and perspectives of those marginalized by mainstream legal discourses. Application to discourse analysis. In discourse analysis, their focus on narrative encourages a deeper exploration of how different stories are told and whose voices are prioritized or silenced within legal and societal discourses. This perspective is vital for understanding how marginalized groups use narrative to contest and reshape dominant narratives that exclude or marginalize them. Intersectionality and anti-discrimination law. Critique of single-axis frameworks. Delgado and Stefanchik argue that traditional anti-discrimination law often fails to adequately address the complexities of identity, particularly where race intersects with other identifiers like gender, class, or sexuality. This critique is crucial for developing more comprehensive approaches to legal and societal reform. Relevance for discourse analysis. Their work on intersectionality can guide discourse analysts in examining how various identities are represented and interact within texts, and how these representations influence perceptions of fairness, justice, and equality. Richard Delgado and Jean Stefanchik's contributions to CRT and their comprehensive examination of racism in American law provide critical insights for applying discourse analysis within a CRT framework. Their work illuminates the profound impact of legal discourse on societal attitudes towards race and the structural mechanisms through which racism is perpetuated. By integrating their analyses, discourse analysts are equipped to explore more deeply the ways in which legal and societal narratives about race are constructed, contested, and potentially transformed. Their scholarly output not only enriches the academic field but also offers practical pathways for addressing and mitigating racial injustice through informed discourse and policymaking. Conclusion. The scholarship of Kimberlé Crenshaw, Derek Bell, Eduardo Bonilla Silva, Patricia Hill Collins, Bell Hooks, Charles Mills, and Richard Delgado and Jean Stefanchik collectively enriches critical race theory and provides profound methodologies for discourse analysis. These thinkers highlight the nuanced ways in which race, gender, and other identity markers intersect to shape societal structures and personal experiences. Their work encourages a more comprehensive approach to analyzing and addressing the complexities of oppression, urging scholars and practitioners to consider the interconnected and overlapping influences of identity on social dynamics. By drawing on these diverse perspectives, discourse analysts can better understand and challenge the systemic powers that perpetuate inequalities, thereby advocating for more inclusive and equitable social policies. Frequently asked questions. What is critical race theory, CRT? Critical race theory is an intellectual movement that emerged in the legal field in the mid-1970s. It examines the relationship between race, law, and power, asserting that racism is ingrained in the fabric of American society and its legal systems. CRT challenges the effectiveness of traditional civil rights approaches by highlighting systemic and structural inequalities. Who is Kimberlé Crenshaw and what is her contribution to CRT? Kimberlé Crenshaw is a foundational CRT scholar who introduced the concept of intersectionality. This framework explores how various forms of social stratification, such as race, gender, class, and sexuality, interconnect to create unique modes of discrimination and privilege. Crenshaw's work emphasizes the need to examine the overlapping systems of oppression that affect individuals with multiple marginalized identities. What is intersectionality in CRT? Intersectionality, a term coined by Kimberlé Crenshaw, refers to the study of overlapping or intersecting social identities and related systems of oppression, domination, or discrimination. The theory is often used in CRT to analyze how systemic injustices and social inequalities occur on a multidimensional basis. How does Derek Bell's work influence CRT? Derek Bell, considered one of CRT's founding figures, contributed concepts like interest convergence and the permanence of racism. His work suggests that racial equality is only achieved when it converges with the interests of white people, and that racism is an enduring component of American society. These ideas challenge the notion of a post-racial society and highlight the deep-rooted nature of racial issues. What is the significance of narrative in CRT? Narrative is a central tool in CRT, used to reveal the realities of oppression that legal doctrines and mainstream discourses often neglect. Scholars like Derek Bell have used narrative techniques to express complex racial truths in an accessible and emotionally impactful way, allowing marginalized voices to narrate their personal and collective experiences of racial injustice. Who are Richard Delgado and Jean Stefanczyk, and what have they contributed to CRT? Richard Delgado and Jean Stefanczyk are key scholars in CRT. They have written extensively on how racism is ingrained in American life and law, emphasizing the social construction of race and the role of storytelling in combating racism. Their book, Critical Race Theory: An Introduction, is one of the most widely used texts to introduce the principles and applications of CRT. How does Eduardo Bonilla Silva's work relate to CRT? Eduardo Bonilla Silva, a sociologist, contributes to CRT with his analysis of colorblind racism, a concept that explains contemporary racial inequality as the outcome of non-racial dynamics. His work argues that racism has become more subtle and institutionalized, manifesting in practices that allow racial inequalities to persist without overt racial discourse. What role does Charles Mills play in CRT? Charles Mills is known for his work on the racial contract, which posits that white supremacy is historically embedded in the foundations of Western political thought, effectively creating a social contract based on race. His philosophical approach expands CRT beyond legal studies to include broader critiques of Western metaphysics and epistemology. How does Patricia Hill Collins contribute to CRT? Patricia Hill Collins is renowned for her work on intersectionality and Black feminist thought, which complements CRT. She explores the intersections of race, gender, class, and nationality, emphasizing empowerment through self-definition and the resistance of marginalized people against oppressive power dynamics. What are the practical applications of CRT in today's society? CRT is applied in various fields beyond law, including education, political science, sociology, and public policy. It serves as a critical framework for examining and challenging the pervasive racial aspects of social issues and for devising more equitable legal and social reforms.